Neither psychology nor sociology nor other social sciences meet in the same blind spot. Science has a blind spot. Contrary to popular belief, people's religiosity is increasing. In fact, they missed the most basic assumption of this positivist approach, which is to reduce everything to the scientific method. What was that assumption?
Hello everyone from Istanbul School. Dear audience, today we will talk about the future of religion. Our guest is Dr. Yasin Ramazan. Welcome, teacher.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank God. And you?
Thank you very much. Sir, we want to talk about the future of religion. Actually, religion was thought to be in the past. There was such an opinion. With science, with the developing world, there was a stereotype that the belief in religion was diminishing, that these were just thoughts and beliefs of the past. There is a question as to whether this has collapsed, whether religion is over. What do you say to this?
Now, where does this idea come from? In fact, the scientific research method, the scientific thinking method we use today, does not go back very far, but a few centuries ago, it meant the development of a method that shows that a certain way of thinking yields scientific results. So what does this mean? First of all, a principle was developed on separating some of the things that are in our experience, that is, the things we experience from others. Which part is this? It can be repeated first of all. In other words, it can come across us again and again. The experiences that I have done, that you can do too. Likewise, experiences that can be shared, that is, that you can understand in a way that is not entirely unique to me and that you can accept, approve of, or reject. It will also be measurable. In other words, we will be able to talk about a quantity about it in some way. We will be able to say little, we will be able to say a lot, we will be able to say big, we will be able to say small. We will be able to measure it in some way. Therefore, these three features, namely repeatability, shareability, and measurability, are the characteristics of experiences. That scientific results could be obtained by using it in a certain way, and it was very successful. How did it succeed? Our knowledge about the world increased, our knowledge about the universe increased, our knowledge about human beings increased. And science gradually began to derive science from the experiences of everything that was not thought to be science or knowledge until then. For example, we saw that chemistry and biology were sciences in addition to physical properties. Later, even its transition to sociology, thinkers like August Comte Weber, they thought that there were also such things about society. In this way, a conviction developed that we could explain everything in the world with this working principle. While this conviction was developing, especially in the 19th century, this led to the development of a reductionist understanding. How reductionist? This is not actually part of experience. Experience itself is reduced to this in its entirety. Therefore, we can explain everything in experience. In other words, we can explain the world in its entirety, in short, through the scientific research method. It was thought that everything can be reduced to this. And that led to the view that you have mentioned. So for centuries, for example, some ethnologists or anthropologists had come to this conclusion. Since the beginning of the world or the beginning of humanity, people have been using certain myths, stories, tales or stories to explain themselves, to understand the world. And this somehow turned into religion, into more systematic religions. Later, with the development of science, there was no need for religion. We will explain everything with science. So there will be no need for religion. It was thought that the more society develops, the more it deals with science, the more it abandons religiousness, and therefore science has actually become a very basic tool of this understanding. In other words, if there is religiousness somewhere, it is considered a poison as its thing, and science is considered its antidote. If we increase science, religion will decrease there. We can see this especially in the positivist understandings of the beginning of the 20th century in many parts of the world. Science is one of the positive sciences. Today, what we call natural sciences consists of sciences such as physics, chemistry, biology. And when we reduce everything to these, there is actually nothing else left to explain. If we eliminate ignorance, religion will also disappear. Was thought to be the case. This is where this view originated. But did the prophecy come true? No, it didn't. Did religion disappear? No, on the contrary. On the contrary, we see that religion has been kept in its place, and I'm not just talking about Turkey, this applies to everywhere. We see that religion has been kept in its place and even expanded. So there is a change, there is a transformation regarding religions, but religion has not gone anywhere, because they missed the most basic assumption of this positivist approach, which is to reduce everything to the scientific method. What was that assumption? As I mentioned, the shareable part of experience. It was the measurable and repeatable part of experience. But our experience does not consist of this. I mean, the human being as a whole. An important part of our experience, our daily life, the things we experience, even the things that are going on in our minds right now, our emotions, how the people who are watching us, for example, position themselves where they are right now. This experience, the experience of being in a place, the experience of being in a time, for example, cannot be shared. It is unique to us.
But this is also explained by psychology. In other words, all of these sciences on the scientific side support each other and reach the same point. In other words, the situations that we cannot make sense of here, that is, that science cannot explain or puts in a different place, psychology science deals with from another place, sociology deals with from another place, and again, somehow it is possible to provide an explanation far removed from religion, perhaps to put religion aside. How should we compare the development of religion there?
Actually, it's mostly psychology, sociology, social sciences such as anthropology, and then humanities like history, philosophy, literature. This is where the biggest problems with the scientific paradigm come from, so there have to be very special points. For example, from one point of view, not everything in psychology can be reduced to experiments. It's the same in sociology, so somehow we need data. We can explain societies in certain ways, but explanations have to be a bit ad hoc. In other words, first we make the observation, then we need to find an explanation that fits it. After making the explanation, collecting data can always lead us to find things that support the explanation. In other words, neither psychology nor sociology nor other social sciences meet in the same blind spot. Science has a blind spot. This blind spot is human subjective experience. What we call the subjective experience of human beings is unique, even though the way each one of us looks at the world, how we feel about it, how we conceptualize it are more or less similar. And this uniqueness was actually set aside at the beginning of the scientific paradigm, that is, at the emergence of this method, in order to be able to use a method. But leaving it aside did not mean that it was unimportant, but it was thought to be. The Enlightenment mind said that if we walk with these, we can solve the problems of humanity. And in what this mind imposed with positivism, science became functional. Let's say it became useful, but it didn't. Our daily life experience, for example, our artistic experience, for example, our moral experience, for example, our religious experience, still remains in that blind spot. So there are things we can never share with each other. Maybe there are things we will never be able to share. We have feelings and thoughts that we don't know how they will affect us, or that we can't express. Now we cannot put them aside because they are not scientific. We can talk about these things. For example, folk songs are sung, there are things expressed in songs. Or let's say we can predict a person's psychological state by measuring their brain waves. But we can still measure what we measure, that is, there are measurements, there are graphs on the screen, some neurons are firing there and so on. But this is not subjective experience. Subjective experience is still my ability to see the world in a way that is not from anyone else's perspective. As I said, these can be thought to be similar, but in a way that is not reducible to each other. So now let's think like this. If I get up from here and leave, in a split second someone else sits here and continues this conversation of mine. You looked, so we continue the same conversation. You ask his name, he says, my name is Yasin, etc. But someone else? Now the person sitting here will not be me. Yes, he can fulfill my function, but he cannot be the same person as me. It is not possible for us to see this subjective perspective in science. It is not technically possible because we cannot repeat it. We cannot repeat our own subjective experience. For example, think of Fatma Hanim from 5 years ago. If you wanted, could you feel like her right now? It is not possible, but those feelings were real and constituted a large part of our experience. It is the same today. What we feel today, for example, our aesthetic perceptions, and even our moral perceptions remain outside of science. Similarly, religion is not within the boundaries of science that we mentioned, has judgments and beliefs. For example, why does the world exist and not exist? Or why does it exist in this way and not in another way? Is God merciful? Is there life after death? Is our soul eternal? Or does our soul develop? We do not have to say that such questions cannot be answered scientifically and therefore they are not answerable at all. This is where religion comes into play, because people's needs have not gone anywhere. People's questions have not gone anywhere. Yes, when we do an experiment, we can all distinguish the parts of the atom in the same way. When we go into the laboratory, we can do experiments that will produce very similar results. But we have a perception of reality outside of these experiences. We have feelings outside of these experiences. And a significant part of that is our religious perceptions and religious beliefs.
When we look at it from here, it seems that religion is not over at all. Religion continues to develop and change. It seems like a living thing. However, our perception or what was seen socially was more like this. Religion descended in a certain place in a certain period with certain holy books and ended. It stayed there. It remained as it was, as it belonged to its time. But the way we look at it, when we compare it with science or life and other things, we see that it is always in a state of development, in a state of change, in a state of development to meet the needs of people.
This is a very important point because our perception of religion, how we live and understand religion, is changing. Because the world perception of the people who experience this changes. In other words, just because religion comes from an absolute source, it does not mean that our religious perception should not change. Because the human condition changes, we all change. As beings dependent on our environment and conditions, we see that there are changes in our religious perception. For example, one of the important changes was this. For those who think that religion will end as science develops, that there will be no need for religion, that it will end, religion is actually largely... It was lived as a religion focused on society and communities. But the current perception of religion is a more individual-focused religion in almost all religions. Individual-focused religion is about finding one's own meaning, doing one's own questioning and establishing contact with the Absolute. the sacred through one's own efforts. This actually shows the following. In other words, religion in the sense they understand it may not be present in the public sphere today. In other words, there may not be a theocracy except for a few states, or religious communities may have some secularized lifestyles, but this does not mean that religion is going somewhere. Religion in its different forms still raises questions for people, answers or gives them a way of life. But we see religious understandings that are more focused on the individual.
This seems like something that actually makes humanity feel much better. In other words, when looking at a religious understanding that belongs to a society, a person can sometimes feel different from their own society, feel excluded, or not feel like they belong to that religion. But you mentioned the uniqueness there when the individual feels like they belong to themselves, integrated with themselves. It seems like a situation that will increase their devotion to religion.
Yes, and I think it's increasing. Contrary to popular belief, people's religiousness is increasing. What do I mean? Identities have become more fluid. This is a result of modernity. Postmodernism has made identities more fluid. Therefore, we do not feel any difficulty in carrying the beliefs of the groups we were born into. We do not carry them. We can let them go. That's why, while making our choices or living our lives, even if we live a religion with a community, we think that we should choose or want that community ourselves. In other words, for example, there are many cases of community conversions in history. In other words, such and such a tribe, such and such a country would change their religion collectively, because that was a community-oriented, society-oriented understanding of religion. However, today, since an individual-oriented understanding of religion has developed more, we, for example, individually change religion or individually focus on religion, become religious, or we can see phenomena such as cooling more often. Because the social sphere is becoming more secular, and this is not a big problem for people who live and believe in religion. In other words, there is no need for traffic rules to be implemented for religious reasons, for example. In other words, even if one lives in a theocracy, traffic rules are something that everyone, religious or not, must obey. Therefore, what we call religiousness or the importance of religion comes into play here actually shows that people are rediscovering places that science does not answer but are very important for human life. However, today, in the classic discussions of atheism and theism, in the discussions that are generally shaped around evolution, what we see is that religion and science are trying to be understood as if they are offering alternative rival explanations to each other. However, this was not the case for a significant part of history. In other words, most religious explanations and theological explanations are not for non-believers. They appeal to how believers should believe. Today there is a lot of concern about the rise of this positivism, also influenced by religious people. In other words, the discussions on the existence or non-existence of God seem to be focused on arguments that can be objective and that will leave everyone without obligation, such as whether it proves this or not. But for most people, these are not the reasons for believing or not believing. It may be based on much more psychological, much more economic, much more medical reasons, much more sociological reasons, and the researches that have been done, research in the psychology of religion and the sociology of religion often shows us that people usually change their religion because of the social or individual traumas they have experienced. And apart from that, it is a universal phenomenon that people turn to certain religions and religious beliefs, especially in old age, when they want to make sense of their lives. And here we see that this religion has evolved into a number of Kurdish religions other than organized religions such as Islam and Christianity. Or even if it is not a religion, we see it evolving into religion-like beliefs, Sometimes it is a football team, sometimes it is horoscopes, sometimes it can be rituals, or it can be meditations about health or something like that. But the value that is given there are experiences related to these unrepeatable things that we are talking about. In other words, experiences related to our emotions, and ignoring those experiences is also a problem in terms of the acceptability of science. Because first of all, for example, trust, there is no objective criterion for trust. There is no such thing as what people trust, where people start to trust, where they lose trust.
Science cannot explain it.
Science cannot explain it and cannot be expected to explain it, because it is different for all of us, and we can trust different people in different ways. We trust different institutions in different ways. We develop different criteria at different ages. And more importantly, we need this sense of trust to do science. Why? Because we need to believe that science gives reliable results. We need to trust it. But where will this trust come from? This trust itself is not scientific, so we need to trust our daily experience so that we can do science. But we also need to recognize the breadth of the framework within which scientific research is possible. It includes things like human loneliness, for example, or human communication with the Creator, or human thinking about the afterlife, and developing a moral life, living a moral life. And we all think about these things. This is how we shape our lives. This is not something we can prevent, not something we can consume with science.
In fact, this trust in science, our need, seems to need another motivation, because we do not gain this from science. But at the same time, there is also a view that the stronger this trust becomes, the closer we get to science, the further we will move away from religion. In other words, we trust science too much, we are too attached to it. We try to explain everything with science. And will this distance us from religion? This concern may arise, or perhaps it really does distance us from religion, but we do not actually gain this trust from science. This seems like a very contradictory situation.
So we need to think about this. Yes, we think that as people get closer to science or get used to scientific thinking, they move away from religious thought and religious beliefs, but maybe it can happen at certain times. This is normal. Because think about it this way, if you take a history exam at a time when you are studying a lot for math, you might get some things wrong. But man is not a being that can survive on scientific thinking all the time. So that's the very first principle of the framework of scientific thinking. Our view of life has to include the experiences that we can be unique and that no one else can have. We need to accept them too. I shouldn't feel this emotion. For example, scientifically, I shouldn't feel it. There is no such thing, you feel it. It's something that comes from within us. Or morally, I should do it in a way B, not in a way A. There's nothing scientific about it. But if morality is a law within us, we act in accordance with it. We act in this direction. And in the world, scientists are actually not largely faithless. In societies, for example, secularization is increasing, because especially the secularization of states has given people such an opportunity. But we don't have any data that scientists are moving away from religion as they do science. On the contrary, as people understand the relationship between their beliefs and what they do. In other words, as we realize that the two are not just rivals of equal valuable beliefs, we see that they have a much more holistic experience. That's our goal anyway. In other words, a person is a whole. If you are involved in science, you will follow that method as long as you are involved in science. But we are not limited to this method.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. If you want, let's close this issue with a few sentences. We talked about religiosity, secularism, the relationship between religion and science. You actually talked about it in a very comprehensive way. You established a beautiful relationship. If you want to close with a few sentences, what would you like to say?
So the idea that science is inherently opposed to religion is a secular idea. And actually what we are going to think of here as opposing is religious thought and secularism. And this use of science in the name of secularism harms science in the first place because it is not inherently opposed to science or scientific thinking. And it's not something that can be abandoned. So we need to look for a method where this balance can be achieved. We need to look for a way of thinking.
Let's continue searching. I hope we find it. Even if we don't, we hope that this search will continue. Thank you very much, teacher, for your valuable comments.
Thank you.
Dear audience, today we talked about the relationship between science, secularism, and religion. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.